I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy.
Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and welcome to Brooklyn Savvy. We are delighted to have Donna Freitas. Now, you are a visiting associate professor at Delphi University. You're a wonderful author. I have really just admired you and the work that you're doing because it's really making a tremendous difference. But before we get into talking about consent, let me introduce our Savvy panelistas. We have Alan Salpeter, Phyllis White-Thorne, and Nomiki Makrilos. Thank you, ladies, for joining. So let's talk about consent on a college campus. What does consent mean, and what is it going to look like? Like, what does it mean today, and what is it looking like?
Well, I think that's a really big question. It's a question that's hard to answer. Mm-hmm. I would say one of the things that we've been doing on college campuses and in our culture is trying to educate people around consent by saying consent is about yes and no. It's about the enthusiastic yes, ideally, or it's about saying no, I don't want to do this. And I think one of the problems with that kind of education is we're making it deceptively simple. And I think consent is actually a really tough thing. So I'm more interested in getting to the heart of what consent is. And I think consent actually, a conversation about consent should point us toward who we are as people. Mm-hmm. And I actually think it's a conversation about ethics. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we've been doing, because we want to make things super simple, is where pretending as though consent doesn't have anything to do with sexual ethics, when really it has everything to do with sexual ethics. And I think in our culture, sexual ethics makes us nervous, which is why we're avoiding. What do you mean by
sexual ethics?
Just thinking about what should I be doing? You know, who am I in relation to other people? What is the role of my partners? What do I think about my partners? Do I care about my partners? Do I care at all? And I think for me, you know, last time I was on your show, I was here to talk about hookup culture.
Yes, yes.
And, you know, hookup culture is sort of the dominant culture around sex on college campuses. And one of the features of hookup culture is, or in theory, a hookup is about some sort of sexual intimacy with somebody, and you're supposed to be able to walk away from it as though you don't care about that person and you don't care about the sex. Mm-hmm. And so on a college campus, you have hookup culture, and then you have everybody trying to have conversations about consent. And for me, one of the things that's at the heart about consent is care for your partner and care for sex.
Absolutely.
So if consent is about care of your partner and about sex, and hookup culture is about the antithesis,
right? How does that?
Then you've got a problem. And so we're talking about one without talking about the other.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more. You know, so in what I've been reading about college campuses, since there still is a hookup culture, it sounds as though consent means for every act of intimacy, you've got to get agreement from your partner. You know, at least that's kind of what I've been research has said, you know, that do you want to kiss? Yes. Do you want to take it further? Yes. Do you, I'm kind of tied up. I don't know how deep to go with this conversation, but that's what it's kind of looking like, asking for permission, right?
But when you say ethics, it comes back to what you feel is a right way to behave. Mm-hmm. And that would go with a right way to treat your partner, as well as what's right in terms of your behavior, how you're going to feel about yourself afterwards.
And the nature also of the relationship. There has to be a relationship. You know, if we're talking about ethics and an ongoing process, if there's a relationship, then there's an unspoken...
But isn't that the antithesis of hookup culture? I mean, you have to have some engagement, but there doesn't have to be much of a relationship to hook up.
with the hookup culture. I think
Right.
consent.
Well, there should be consent in a hookup culture too, I'm assuming.
Well, of course, of course.
Right.
I think one of the problems is, hookup culture, or just in general, one of the places we've landed on college campuses is a culture of sex where people aren't really worried about communication, or where sex in theory is supposed to be meaningless. You're not supposed to care about it. You're supposed to be casual. Like you're literally
it's a
supposed to be
physical
casual.
act.
But the problem with that is that when then we're also concerned about consent, which isn't at all casual, right? If you're concerned about consent, then you're not going to be casual about the sex you're having, and you're not going to be casual about your partners either. You're going to be worried about their well-being. So I think there's a disconnect there.
Absolutely.
So-
Yeah, there is.
And for us to start here, I thought we were going to end here, but exactly. There is a disconnect, because I think that when it comes to consent on college campuses, alcohol plays a big role in in the hookup culture.
Absolutely.
It plays a big role. So if you have two people that are in some sort of sexual contact and both of them are under the influence, who's responsible? If both people are out of their minds, they're drunk, they're intoxicated, where's the ethics? All that stuff starts to get blurred.
I would say, though, for me, the bigger question is how have we landed in a culture where, for example, taking advantage of someone who is drunk is a good idea? Like, what is it about, or somehow having sex when we're completely unself-aware, when we're not going to remember anything.
Been around
like how
for a really long time.
Yes,
I don't think that's today's phenomenon.
but I think that we are living in a culture where, seeing someone who's passed out at a party becomes an opportunity for sex.
That's kind of
and I think we have to ask ourselves, how did we get here?
Right, so you're asking societal questions
Yes.
Interesting.
that are not
So
about the
what do you-
individuals. They're
What do you think?
Kind of
What do you think of
impulsive,
that?
primitive, living in the moment, and kind of not owning any outcomes, not thinking of the next step or the outcome or the residual damage, if I may say, from that. Just living in the moment. I think there's a lot of young people, again, intoxicated, under the influence of drugs, that in that moment are very impulsive and very need-driven and don't think of consequences.
And don't think of how they're coming across to the other person at all.
No.
You're not even thinking that
and
way.
so an opportunity like that is kind of
But you
taking
really
advantage.
think, Miki, obviously it happens. It's what you're reporting on in your books and the college campuses. But
Right.
I think it gets back to that kind of societal moral code center. How you see someone passed out, there should be no way that there's a thought of predation. What you should do is say, hey, are you okay? What can I do for you? As any human being, regardless of anything else, not let me take advantage of someone who's unconscious.
Right.
And so I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes. I think for me, a conversation about consent should point us toward really hard questions about who we are as people.
I
what we
can't
can
agree with
do.
you more on that. Go, what'd you say,
And I
Phyllis?
think what we can do, because what I'm hearing, and as you talked about it, it seemed very complicated. So how are these two moral standards living on the college campuses? What does it look like? And my thought being what you said just now, how did we get here and what can we do to somehow mitigate these issues? Because it really does seem a little schizophrenic. It seems crazy.
Well, I was saying a little bit earlier before we started that I feel like we're not having the right conversations about consent in our culture. And I think what I mean by that is because we are also worried, right? We're also worried about rape culture, about the high incidence of sexual assault and sexual harassment in our society in general, but also on college campuses. And so what we're doing is we're looking for quick fixes, and I don't think there's a quick fix, but also institutions are worried about legal implications. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're allowing policies and laws to determine how we educate about consent. So the conversation about consent becomes about avoiding negative consequences. So how can I avoid getting in trouble?
Like raising a teenager.
Well, but how can I avoid getting in trouble, as opposed to how does my attitude toward consent reflect who I am as a person and how I want to be in the world in relation to others? So we're having the how can I make sure I don't break this policy and get in trouble conversation. What do I need to get to make sure I'm allowed to have sex, as opposed to who do I need to be in order to be a good partner in relation to someone?
So this actually sounds as though it's completely values driven.
Yes.
You know, and it's something that if you're not getting at home, perhaps there's a role for the educational institutions to play when it comes to sex education. And part of sex education being that you have to have some self-esteem, some self-worth, some attitude around yourself where that you have certain expectations of a partner. And that has whittled away because of the hookup culture. And it sounds as though this is something that maybe we need to bring back. That when you're in an intimate relationship, it would seem to me that there must be some caring in it, so that you can, in fact, have the kinds of conversations that lead to the healthy outcome. You get what I mean?
I agree with that, and I think that it goes
Almost
even
got lost.
It goes further back than school. I think I go back to the home.
They're right in there,
That's where it
but
starts.
And it's Ellen
starting.
that brought me there, because she said, I'm raising a teenager. And that came to my mind. Yes. So what responsibility do parents have in terms of helping their children to have values that they take into wherever they are, and it helps them to make the right choices for themselves.
And it's a golden rule, but I also think, certainly in my lifetime, I grew up in a culture that there was always the guy that was going to have notches in their belt. I mean, this is not new.
Right.
This is not new.
Absolutely.
And women, I think, were always told to look for, in general, and again, I just think that people want different things from sex, and because of society and the way that they are framed either at home, on television, online. I mean, there's so many things coming at people today about what they should, whether it's in church, there's all these different pathways, and there's so many messages. So who's the successful person? It's the one that, perhaps disrespects people and gets ahead, regardless of gender. And, so you go right back to what is consent. It's about how you value your own worth and how you value the worth of, you're saying partner, but it could be anybody, really how we treat each other. And so this notion of, date rape, all that stuff, it's because of technology is much more discussed. I went to college decades ago, and I was a rape crisis counselor then. Because the issues were there, they just weren't, Twitter feeds.
One of the things I always say when I speak about this stuff to college students is just, I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all approach to sexuality or being a sexual being. I think there's many, many different ways to express who you are and your desires. But I think the problem right now is that young adults are growing up to a culture where they are learning that what is normal is to be casual about sex, period. What is normal is to hook up. And so rather than see, like I did, for example, when I was at Georgetown as a college student, hookup culture existed, but it was kind of like this little town on campus we could go visit, and we could go live there if we wanted, but we didn't have to, it wasn't the only thing we had. And so there were lots of options. I felt you could go on a date, you could do whatever you wanted. So, but I feel like today a lot of students feel like the doorway to all things is via the hookup or via casual sex. And so they don't really feel empowered to choose, I think.